We begin with what many are calling a bombshell investigative report out of the New York Times detailing the long-running issues in the Epstein scandal, which caused an internal freakout at the Trump White House. This reporting is actually through the process that we've sometimes seen before, where journalists who work at an outlet on a daily sort of beat also work on longer form projects and books. And so the reporting is, we should mention, part of an upcoming book by several of the top sort of Trump White House reporters and D.C. reporters on the beat. And they, in this process, actually say they spoke to over 1,000 sources. So this is more than even just one or two big articles. This is drawing off of all of that, and it reports how the Trump White House officials and administration looked at the Epstein scandal as so serious that top officials, let's take this for the viewers in full so they can read it, top officials were gathering in the White House Situation Room. That is, of course, the secure bunker where classified high-stakes national security matters are discussed. For contrast, it's not a place where you deal with political domestic spin. It's where this historic moment occurred, where President Obama and Vice President Biden were tracking, along with the national security team, the ongoing operation to take out and kill Osama bin Laden. That was 2011. That's the Situation Room, at least when used by presidents who take it seriously. The Times noting the Trump officials used it to try to gain measure of control over a very different kind of crisis threatening to engulf the presidency. They continue to use the situation for those discussions. The Times reports that by summer 25, the Situation Room itself had become basically inseparable from the Epstein crisis. This is more than a matter of staging. It sort of tells you about the use, abuse, and misplaced priorities, according to critics, of how they dealt with the Epstein crisis. Trump's vice president was the most vocal about releasing the Epstein files, reportedly arguing that even unsubstantiated allegations and anecdotes about Trump should go out. This is interesting because it takes you inside what was this rolling process. The Times reported that if the administration published them first, it would demonstrate good faith. It would take the oxygen out of the conspiracy theories, they thought. Now, that tidbit could be significant considering how Trump's top DOJ official was flip-flopping over the files release. Bondi was saying this a month after taking office.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
Bondi had infamously asserted falsely that she had the client list on her desk. That was quickly undercut by the facts. And then the DOJ, under her, this was a Bondi DOJ memo, had to admit there was no client list. They didn't uncover evidence, they said, for an investigation against any uncharged third parties. That, by the way, remains controversial as the House continues to hear witnesses who think there are people, including powerful men, that maybe should be charged. And then, as you see here, they claimed there was no further disclosure of the Epstein files that would be appropriate, which stoked outrage, disbelief, and anger from many, from survivors to independent legal experts to, of course, the people Trump had promised would get the files, the MAGA base.
How come you redact some people and you don't redact other people? Like, what is this? This is not good. None of this is good for this administration. It looks terrible.
It's the way they've handled the scandal has been so bad.
Completely agree. This is self-inflicted.
The current DOJ under Pam Bondi is covering up crimes, very serious crimes.
It looks terrible. It looks terrible for Trump when he was saying that none of this was real. This is all a hoax. This is not a hoax.
There is something there, and it's being covered up, and the president blessed it.
And that's just from some of the people who'd been historically aligned and friendly to Trump on this, to say nothing of survivors, independent experts, and others. And so this Times report drops today at a period where Trump has again failed to stem the interest in Congress, including congressional Republicans. We continue to hear from witnesses yesterday and today. What you're looking at on your screen is from that same time period, because this was lying to your own people. Those binders have nothing important in them, but they were labeled Epstein files. Trump lying to his base and feeding an awareness on the right that he was part of the cover-up. The person who promised the transparency was actually misusing the government to keep the secrets of the pedophiles and lying to his very base. Administration feeding information to those conservative personalities, thinking that it might work. According to the Times, again, this new account, Bondi and that approach, which clearly wasn't working by any measure, not for policy transparency and not for politically stemming the crisis, was infuriating the number two at the FBI, Dan Bongino, who had actually rode this issue on his podcast, sort of to his national acclaim. And so the new report today says Bongino was erupting at Bondi during one meeting, yelling at her, "You blanked this thing up from the start. The way you've been talking about this, that dumb blanking charade with the Epstein files, the they're on my desk nonsense, all the promises to the folks out there." Now, I'm reading from a new account. The Times does not publish something like that in quotes unless they really think they have it. Now, maybe Bongino was happy to confirm it because he has ever since then tried to tell his supporters and others the problem was the White House and Bondi, not him. But whatever the reasoning of these sources, this is a very serious report about the level of meltdown and rancor over the Epstein secrecy. Now, fast forward to today, Bongino's out. He was, according to the article, thinking about trying to leave that day, but stayed on to be helpful to Trump. Bondi, of course, is out, partly over this Epstein problem. Bongino, of course, has gone back to where he makes more money and maybe finds a better life schedule. On his show, he said this about the files.
I want to see the files, folks. I said, don't let it go. I meant it. We got elected. We looked at it. The file was not what was in there, was not what we thought would be in there. It's not going to satisfy many, and that's fine. But folks, I'm not going to spend the next 2 years talking about it. This administration got you the information.
Not going to spend the next couple of years talking about it. You just spent the last couple of years talking about it. I'm only smiling at the political convenience of it, not, of course, the underlying seriousness. But that's the question. Who really cares about the seriousness of the issue and who just tried to use and abuse it? A White House spokesperson telling the Times Trump's claims that he was innocent in Epstein matters, that that's long been the case, that they've always said that. President Trump, they say, has done more for Epstein's victims than anyone before him. Fact check, false. Now, I will tell you that prior administrations in both parties also failed transparency in the victims. That's according to what we've learned in our reporting, and we've heard many victims and their advocates say that. So if you're looking at this from a party standpoint, both parties have overseen DOJ and FBI during periods that have failed the victims. But the upside-down claim that this one was better is completely false and something that kind of a lot of people agree on. I mean, I just showed you Rogan, Tucker, Megyn, survivors, experts. Nobody thinks they've done a good job on this. As for those in Trump's corner, the Times reports that by late summer, it was apparent to the president's aides that the Epstein saga was not the same as the countless other crises they'd weathered to their great surprise and disquiet. Quote, Trump's old tricks of deflection and denial were not working. Didn't work then. Didn't work until today. And while Trump and Vance had hoped that when the stuff finally came out, even over Donald Trump's opposition, and when Congress made them release it, that by then it would be a bad news cycle and eventually go away. And yet here we are today discussing not only this exhaustive account from the Times, but the witnesses that have come forward yesterday, Epstein's longtime secretary, and today, Bill Gates, shows that Congress, even on a bipartisan basis, continues to pull the threads on this massive scandal.
Right. So, and just to be clear, I mean, I'm on the opinion side. We're totally separate from the news side. But just so this is from what I've read. I mean, one of the things that jumped out to me is that they were actually talking about a pardon at one point for Ghislaine Maxwell. Right. I mean, I think that I'm not sure if that conversation itself happened in the Situation Room, but we've been wondering how she ended up in this relatively cushy prison that she was not supposed to be eligible for. It doesn't exactly give us answers, but they were talking about kind of offering her some sort of incentive to give an interview that would take the heat off Donald Trump. And sure enough, she gave an interview that meant to take the heat off Donald Trump with Todd Blanche, and now she's in a much better place. the other thing that struck me is that these were very meticulously reconstructed conversations among a relatively small inner circle. And so they've all got to be looking at each other now thinking, who can I trust, right? Like, who is going to repeat the details of this conversation? And I think that we can now see in retrospect, to your last point, that this was the beginning of a crack up in this coalition that is ongoing, and that has been exacerbated by this debacle in Iran.